Hey everyone, so on this episode of Make It with Calvin, I've busted the laptop out, hence a slightly different camera angle, but we're going to go through and actually figure out what this laser cutter cost me to give you an idea of what it might run you to set one of these machines up for yourself. Obviously there are certain things that I may have already had that you might not, but the point is just to give a rough approximation of how much to expect to spend on something like this. I'm not including my time, which there was a lot of it to pull this off, strictly because everybody values their time differently, but hopefully this will be enough to give you at least a decent idea of what it will cost for you to set something like this up. So let's dive into it. Okay, so I've broken this down into two categories. We have the essentials, which is the machine, and we have the nice to have, which is everything else that I've added on that I do feel was definitely necessary, but you can start cutting without it if you're really in a budgetary pinch. So let's dive into that. So during the essentials, we obviously have the laser cutter itself. I purchased mine off eBay and shipped to my door with tax. It was $366.34. Now, obviously there are different machines at different price points. I pretty much went and found, relatively speaking, the cheapest that I could, figuring that, you know what, let me go for the cheap one. I wasn't really seeing a gigantic improvement in the other machines. I'm not saying the more expensive ones might not have a better control board in them or things like that, but overall I was just kind of like, you know what, I'm just going for the dirt cheap one here. Let's see what the heck shows up. It did have returns available, which was a good thing. Thankfully, I did not need to use that, but I figured that was good to have just in case. Now, next up, we have the exhaust fan. Now, initially when I bought an exhaust fan, ironically, it cost me about the same, but it was so wimpy, didn't do crap. So when it comes to an exhaust fan, I will have a link in the description to the good exhaust fan and the bad exhaust fan. And I will say the laser that I bought included an exhaust fan, but realistically, unless you were just cutting paper with the thing all day, it doesn't do dog poop to suck air out of the machine, which is really, really frustrating. So get yourself a good quality exhaust fan. You will thank yourself, your mirrors, your lens, your cut quality. You'll just thank yourself in the long run. It might be big, it might be noisy, but you know what? It gets the smoke out. It's not making the room smoky. Win. Big win. So that cost me, for the good one, I'm not including the crappy one, $27.21. Not too bad. Then, obviously, we need a way to get that smoke out of the machine and yeet it into a safer atmosphere. Now, in my case, my machine actually came with a decent quality exhaust hose. It's actually like that aluminum spiral coil dryer exhaust hose. Very nice. I was actually very impressed with that. And thankfully it came with enough of that I could run it from the laser through the fan and then through an exhaust duct, which is technically used for like dryers and things like that. I also got lucky that there was a literal hole in the wall that was there that I could use, so I just went around it with some great stuff foam, stuck it in there. Good enough. Hasn't been a problem since. I will have links to everything down below. I will say if you can get the exhaust duct, if you will, that has the plastic screen mesh over it, I'd recommend doing that so critters and stuff are less likely to get in there. Not a bad idea. Didn't really cost me anything extra. Alternatively, you could always print a cover. Just make sure whatever you put over there doesn't block the airflow, because you want a large volume of air going through the laser and outside so the fumes do not get back into the room. Trust me, you don't want that. Now, because the laser tube itself is water cooled on this machine, I did have to buy 3 gallons of distilled water, and I'm approximating the cost of on that of being $4 for the sake of easy math. And to prevent algae from growing in there, I just picked up some algae drops over at Walmart, and I'm going to call the price on that $5. Close enough is good enough. So to get the laser to a functional point, I already had a plastic box that I was using as the water tank. I have, I think, about a 2.5 to 3 gallon water capacity in there, which is not bad. To a certain point, I mean, a swimming pool would be great, but that's kind of out of the realm of possibility. Having about a 3 gallon minimum is a good starting point with the water because it takes a lot of thermal energy to warm that water up and a lot to cool it down. But the point is, if you have a large thermal mass of water, the advantage is hopefully whatever cooling setup you have or just the mass of the water that's there will be enough to prevent your temperature from doing this, which is a problem that I had with a much smaller setup. And I'll get into what I'm doing for my cooling in just a minute. But realistically speaking, having a couple of gallons of distilled water there is not a bad idea. So the total for me came out to $416.57 to get the laser operable. Now, the next category is what I call nice to have. Now, some of this, some people would argue is, well, you need to do this before you run the laser. And some people go, well, it's a good idea once you get it going to do this. I really leave that up to you and however big or small your budget is. So one of the things that I knew right off the bat is the included pump was very, very weak. If I'm doing cutouts of, say, buildings or things like that, I'm easily running a 5 to 8 minute continuous cut cycle on this machine. And that's a lot of load on the laser tube. Obviously, the tubes will die over time. It's a given. It happens. But realistically, I want to make sure that I can get at least my money's worth out of this machine. And spending a little bit extra on a better pump and some larger tubing wasn't a bad idea. So I got a refurbished pump on Amazon for $23.23 shipped to my door. This one moves a whole heck of a lot more water. And while I was at it, I also got some larger diameter silicone tubing because I wanted to make sure that I didn't really have any flow restrictions within the line. And yes, it was a little bit of work to go in there and replumb the whole machine, but I'm definitely glad I did it. I noticed a lot more water flowing through and a lot less problems with air bubbles, so win in that department. Now, the tubing cost me $18.31, and I literally had just enough to get the job done. I'm not even joking. It was tight. And the tubing wasn't cheap, but I highly recommend using the silicone tubing just because of the flexibility of it, especially considering the way I have my cooling system set up. Thankfully, I haven't had any kink problems, but, you know, do what works best for you. But I personally prefer the flexibility of the silicone. I know it costs more, but it's the price I'm willing to pay, especially when I'm putting the silicone tubing onto the laser tubes. It's a very tight fit, and I do not want to break a $300 tube because I was trying to force some vinyl tubing on there that wasn't going to play nice. So after that, I have a radiator. Now, I also got this as a refurb. It is a 360 millimeter, I believe, water cooling radiator, and I got it for $22.23. Now, I couldn't really find any information online about how big of a radiator do you need to dissipate X amount of heat energy. I even thought, and I'm not even joking, back in the day with Ashley, of getting like a replacement radiator for like my Honda, which I can get like a cheap one for like $30, which would probably be more than adequate to get the job done. You could probably even do passive cooling with it. But realistically speaking, I did not have that much space. I didn't want to have to mess with that. A long time ago, LTT did a video about trying to water cool a PC using a computer car radiator, and it was kind of a disaster. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't kind of jank, but I was like, you know what? Let me just get a purpose-built radiator. It's more convenient as well. Maybe in the future, if you guys are really interested, I might do something like that. Like, what could you do with the big radiator? But, what's the point? So that was $22.23. I did need to get some fittings for it, though, so I got a total of 4 of them, and that was $10.53. Also, I needed some radiator fans. I didn't go insane on the radiator fans here. I wasn't like, let me go get some server fans. I figured the passive heat dissipation of the radiator alone was probably going to be okay. And in my testing before I put the fans on, it actually was dissipating a little bit of heat. But putting the fans on there, especially when the ambient air temperature is cool, turn that thing on 5 or 10 minutes before you're gonna laser, you'll actually see the water temperature drop because it's blowing that cool air through and it's cooling the liquid, which is perfect. So the 3 fans cost me $16.14, and they're more than adequate to get the job done. I can't complain. Now this is a little bit more of a bougie item, you could say, but I did get a fan power splitter for $7.53. I figured, you know what? This is not a bad idea, and the advantage is the fans are 12 volts and the water temp gauge, which I'm going to mention in a minute, is also 12 volts. This meant that with the 3 fans, I had a total of 5 slots. I have 2 available. I can just plug the temp gauge into that when I get around to wiring that up. Boom. Life's simple. I can't complain. Having that power splitter there is not a bad idea. And I have a spare 12 volt port in case there was anything else that needed to run on 12 volts that needed to be powered by it. So now we move to the water temp gauge. Now this one is an inline temp gauge that I have set up on the output from the radiator. I'm figuring at this point, this is telling me the temperature of the liquid that's going into the tank. And I know some of you are going to argue, well, you also need a tank water monitor, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I might do that in the future, but honestly, I haven't seen the need for it. So this is also nice because it has a little spinner inside that tells you if there's any flow going through. So if you pinch the hose, you'll notice that it really slows down. That cost me a total of $15.26, and it used the other 2 water fittings that I had purchased previously. So I can't really complain in that department. It's definitely a nice addition to have. And I actually, one of the very first things I made with the laser is actually laser cut up a little acrylic stand for it. Nothing fancy, but hey, it gets the job done. And obviously everybody has a different metric for how cool do I make my laser tube. I know some people will literally hack water ice makers. There's a whole market of just pure radiator and compressor powered chillers. In my case, I'm trying to keep this thing budget here. I didn't feel spending half the price of the machine for something like that was worth it. And so far, so good with my setup. I will say if the ambient temperature is somewhat higher, I can't run as long, but Ashley has a Glowforge and she has to run the thing at night during the summer because it'll overheat. So I don't feel too bad about my budget setup then. So that I would say is the end of that for the nice to have upgrades. And that cost me a total of $113.23. So obviously, if you're really on a budget, kind of figure things out. Maybe you've got a friend who's into PC water cooling who has an old radiator he's not using. Flush the thing out really well. Use that. Really kind of just use what you have at your own disposal and go from there. If you're really in a pinch, just get some of those blue ice reusable ice cube things and just pull those in and out of your water tank every few minutes to keep the water cool. It's an option. So the total came out to, I'm just going to round it up, $530 to get the laser going. Now, I will say that if I'm charging my design rate to set the machine up, I would say there's probably at least $250 to $500 worth of my time that got dumped into the machine to get it fully operational. And I'm talking coming up with a method of holding the material. I've not included that price into this because I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to stick with that or not. It's a modified version of Scorchworks bed setup, and I'd say that probably cost me another $30. You know, we'll just say 20. It costs more than that. We'll just say 20 for the sake of easy math, so up to $550 here. You know, I'm still figuring out how to hold the material in there. I don't know if I'm going to do a motorized setup, so I've intentionally not included that into the price. And I'm kind of rolling that into the whole my time costing extra side of things. But overall, if you are willing to put the effort into one of these machines, and if you are completely understanding of the fact that this thing is built to the freakishly lowest price point possible, and I want to keep it harping on that, there's a reason why this thing cost me $366 shipped to my door. They're using as cheap components as possible. And I know there's people who are going to argue, well, you know, that's the reason why it costs a little, blah, blah, blah. And they have a point. But the point is, this is not a Glowforge. This is not an epilogue. I'm completely aware of that, but I also know from being in the 3D printing community long enough, people expect the $130 printer to be the same as the $500, and it doesn't work like that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I know it's a bit long and rambling, but I want to be as realistic with this as possible. If you guys own one of these, or you're curious in one of these and you want to see some content about it, please let me know. Mind you, I am being a bit critical here because I am comparing it to the epilogue at my work, but I'm doing that because I want to give a realistic interpretation of kind of what you're getting for the money. So, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you here next time on Make It with Calvin. And as for me, I got a few more building kits I need to laser out. See you guys later.